Alabama Spitfire, the story of Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird. Written by Bethany Hegedus, illustrated by Aaron McGuire. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. The red soil of Monroeville, Alabama is as rocky as the state's past. But born in that same soil are the roots of the girl who grew up to write the book of the 20th century. Nell Harper Lee entered this world on April 28, 1926. From the get-go, she was a Spitfire. Unlike her sisters Alice and Louise, Nell shunned what she called the pink penitentiary of girlhood. She embraced dungaree overalls, scampering up trees, and rolling in tires like her brother Edwin. Knee and elbow scrapes didn't bother her one bit. In 1929, the Great Depression hit big cities hard. But in Monroeville, even during boom times, no one had much money. Neighbors were used to helping neighbors, but Nell's hometown, even with its friendly folk, was still like the rest of the South. White people and black people attended separate schools and drank from separate water fountains, and when it came to justice, separate was most definitely not equal. Nell's daddy, A.C., a lawyer, was a big believer in justice. On hot, humid afternoons, instead of going to the movies, Nell watched him try cases in the courthouse. In the evenings, Nell would climb onto his lap to read the newspaper. Before she hit first grade, Nell could read on her own. Nell loved words. She loved the sounds they made, how she could string them together to appease someone or to rile them up. Words had weight. Words held meaning. But when it came to schoolyard conflicts, Nell preferred to use her fists. It wasn't that Nell was a bully, though she did have a temper. She just couldn't help but fight for what was fair. She always took up for the underdog, and no one was more of an underdog than Truman, a boy who had come to visit his aunts for a spell and ended up living next door to Nell. Dressed in white linen suits with a high-pitched voice, True was an easy target for bullies. Nell became his friend and protector. Nell and True shared a love of books. Monroeville didn't have a public library, but as tight as money was, their families still made sure they both had books to read. Nell's treehouse became their secret hideout. From there, the friends could spy on the entire neighborhood. One house in particular caught their curiosity. The shutters of the Bulwares' ramshackle house were always closed. Nell and True knew there was a story there. They watched, they whispered, they wondered. Around this time, A.C. gifted Nell and True with the black Underwood No. 5 typewriter. They took turns, one dictating stories based on their treehouse spying and the other typing. Oh, the stories they wrote. Old Mrs. Busybody and The Fire and the Flame. They were in hog heaven. Until True's mother remarried and he moved to New York City. Nell missed True, but time marched on even in sleepy southern towns. No girl stays a girl forever. In college, Nell didn't care about parties or fashion. As editor of the school newspaper, she cared about people, about words, about stories, both fact and fiction. Nell attended law school, but like her father and her older sister Alice, but she didn't finish. The same girl who had typed in the treehouse wasn't done telling stories. She made her way back to Monroeville to break the news that her dream was to be a writer. A.C. didn't approve, but he knew he couldn't stop his headstrong daughter. So in 1949, at the age of 23, Nell boarded a northbound train. Where was she headed? New York City, America's literary capital and home to her old friend True. The runt of Monroeville was now known as Truman Capote. Like Nell, he had never stopped writing. In fact, Nell's pal had made it big. He was a best-selling author. Nell, once True's protector, was taken under his wing. He introduced her to all the important people, and in New York, there were many important people. Nell settled into a small apartment in the Yorkville neighborhood, a long walk from the nearest subway station. After a series of odd jobs, she began working the reservations counter at the British Overseas Airways Corporation. Any chance she had, Nell sat at her typewriter, the clicks and clacks of the keys mixing with the honks of the city traffic. She began with short stories, writing, revising. Nell worked day in and day out for 7 years, but she didn't send out her stories. She didn't think her work was ready. Yet. But Nell was stubborn, and her Alabama Spitfire streak would not let her give up. Nell's dedication didn't go unnoticed. Some of True's fancy friends saw how hard she worked on her writing, and on Christmas Day in 1956, Nell found an envelope with her name on it pinned to their tree. Dear Nell, you have 1 year off from your job to write whatever you please. Merry Christmas. With the crash and the clatter of the city all around her, Nell left short stories behind. She began a novel. All those years of treehouse spying served her well. Nell started with what she knew best, writing about a small Alabama town inspired by her Monroeville roots. The sense of perspiration and talcum powder, the memories of lazy Sunday afternoons, the hubbub of the town square, plus the drama of watching AC in the courtroom all got mixed together to make a story as satisfying as a serving of grits and gravy. Nell's first 50 pages landed her an agent. Then she wrote 50 more, and 50 more. Once her agent sold her book, she worked with her editor and rewrote it again and again. You're right, she said. Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. People generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for. After 3 years and many titles, Nell's book, To Kill a Mockingbird, was ready at last. The world met the residents of Macomb County on July 11, 1960. Nell, the girl who fought playground injustice, was at it again, publishing a book where a small town and its people struggled with what was wrong and what was right, and where skin color didn't automatically make one guilty. Everybody in Alabama was talking about the book, too. To Kill a Mockingbird flew off the shelves, making bestseller lists all over the country. It even won the Pulitzer Prize, the biggest literary award in the United States. But Nell's small-town story wasn't bound to be just a book. Before long, it became an award-winning movie, too. Nell, the Alabama Spitfire, was famous. But Nell didn't like the limelight. The feeling of success, Nell said, was like being hit over the head and knocked cold. Nell found herself in a new fight, one for her privacy. How would she tackle this? Not with fists, not with stories, but what? With silence. Nell shut out reporters, declining interviews, and rarely making public appearances. Even so, her book continued to sell. To Kill a Mockingbird caused readers, all readers, to imagine themselves as Scout, as Atticus, as Tom Robinson, to climb into his skin and walk around in it. In doing so, Nell's book sold over 40 million copies. So what became of Harper Lee, the tomboy-turned-author? Did she hide away in the big city where she was one of many, or did she seek solace in her hometown where she was simply Miss Nell? Nell chose both. For over 40 years, she hopped trains and lived part of the year amid skyscrapers and part of the year amid Alabama fishing holes. She carved out a life of her own design. The red, rocky soil of her youth welcomed Nell home for good in her 80s. Reporters still clamored for interviews, but Nell's steely Spitfire streak held strong. At the age of 89, the girl who grew up to be Harper Lee died. Nell is buried in Monroeville, the town she made famous in fictional form. And To Kill a Mockingbird continues to do the speaking and fighting for her. Author's note. For many, including me too, actually, there is no book more beloved than Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. It is taught with chapters being excerpted as early as 4th grade in schools all over the country. In Mr. Dykeman's 5th grade class, I read the title scene where Atticus encounters the rabid dog. I was hooked. That summer, I read the book cover to cover and did so once a year for over 20 years. In surveys, To Kill a Mockingbird is listed after only the Bible as America's favorite book. Though beloved the world over, not much is known about its author, Nell Harper Lee, who hadn't given a sit-down interview since 1964, just 4 years after its publication. I began this book before the death of Harper Lee. As a writer, knowing how strongly my childhood shaped me, I started rooting around in Nell's. Her early life in Monroeville, Alabama had major impact on her work, and that was where the story seeds for To Kill a Mockingbird got planted. In fact, the book spans 3 years, 1932 to 1935, when Nell and the fictional Scout grew from 6 to 9 years old. And of course, there's Nell's friendship with Truman Capote, who said in interviews that Scout, Jem, and Dill's attempts to get Boo Radley to make an appearance are quite literal and true, and are based on their fascination with the Bull Wears' son. From 1949 to 1960, as a young writer in New York, Nell worked tirelessly at her craft. As a reward for her diligence, Nell's good friends Michael and Joy Brown funded her a year of writing and helped her get her work seen by an agent, Maurice Crane. Crane liked her short stories but encouraged Nell to write a novel. Crane sold Nell's work in progress to publisher J.P. Lippincott with an advance of a few $1,000s. With her editor, Therese Tay von Hohoff, Nell revised the novel that would become To Kill a Mockingbird. Nell dropped her first name and published under the name Harper Lee. She didn't want her first and last names to run together, with Nell Lee pronounced as Nellie. A few weeks after publication in July 1960, To Kill a Mockingbird was a top 10 bestseller in both the New York Times and Chicago Tribune. At a time when racial injustice garnered the national news spotlight, the book became a phenomenon. The same year the book was published, students in Greensboro, North Carolina staged a sit-in in a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, an SNCC, was formed. Nell's book may have been set in the Great Depression, but it also spoke to what was happening in the country in the Civil Rights era when it was published. In 1961, the novel won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. In 1962, the film adaptation won 3 Academy Awards: Best Writing for Horton Foote's adapted screenplay, Best Actor for Gregory Peck's portrayal of Atticus Finch, and Best Art Direction. These awards secured both the book and the movie adaptation a place in history. The amount of interview requests and fan mail Nell received increased, and in every interview, Nell was asked about her next book. In one interview, she answered, "Yes, and it goes slowly, ever so slowly." But as time went on and another book did not appear, Nell became more and more of a recluse. Her answer changed to variations of, "I've said all I have to say." When Nell was 88, a novel she had written in the 1950s was discovered and released. Go Set a Watchman caused fans old and young to flock to bookstores and order copies online, creating another media frenzy. Nell died 7 months after Go Set a Watchman's release. Amid all the hoopla, Nell stayed silent. She continued to let both stories speak directly to the readers.